What is up guys, it's Cal, and in this video we'll be going over the Arms Warrior changes that will be coming in battle for Azeroth. And similar to Fury Warriors, there are quite a bit of changes, at least compared to the other classes I've done overviews on so far. So anyways, I will be showing you the baseline abilities and passives as well as the talents and PvP talents of the Arms Warrior. Now this video is not to show you which talents to pick for the best DPS, or if Arms is better than Fury at DPS. This is merely to show you what's to come in the next expansion. So let's get started. These are all of the baseline abilities for Arms Warriors. So let's start off with Heroic Leap. That is unchanged. It is still a 45-second cooldown. You can use it, you leap to a location, and it does physical damage to enemies within 8 yards of you. Intimidating Shout is also unchanged. Still a 1.5 minute cooldown. Enemies within 8 yards of you, up to 5 enemies within 8 yards of you, become disoriented. Die by the Sword is also unchanged. Still a 3-minute cooldown, increases your parry chance by 100% and reduces all damage you take by 30% for 8 seconds. Rallying Cry is coming back, sort of. I mean, this was Commanding Shout. It was Rallying Cry, before Legion, and then they switched it to Commanding Shout, and now its name is back to Rallying Cry. It does the same thing as Commanding Shout, though. So, 3-minute cooldown, grants all party or raid members within 40 yards, 15% temporary and maximum health for 10 seconds. So the effect has not changed. The icon for Commanding Shouts has not changed. Its name is just going back to Rallying Cry, I guess. Berserker Rage is unchanged, still a 1-minute cooldown. You go Berserk, removing and granting immunity to fear, sap, and incapacity effects for 6 seconds. A Whirlwind, unchanged. 30 rage, you attack all enemies within 8 yards of you, and it does physical damage. So for some reason when I made this warrior they put cleave on my bar, but cleave is actually not baseline anymore, it's becoming a talent. So when I talk about the talent, I'll be talking about what cleave does. Blade Storm is staying the same, still a 1.5 minute cooldown. You attack all enemies within 8 yards of you, doing physical damage over 5.2 seconds, and you're still immune to movement impairing effects and loss of control effects. But you can use defensive abilities and can avoid attacks. Sweeping Strikes is becoming baseline, and its effect, I believe its effect has changed, yeah. 25-second cooldown because it's not passive. For 10 seconds, your single target damaging abilities hit one additional target within 8 yards for 100% damage. Heroic Throw is unchanged, still a 6-second cooldown. You throw your weapon at a target, doing physical damage, and it generates high threat. Taunt is unchanged. 8-second cooldown. I don't know why they would change Taunt. For Charge, the only change to Charge is that it no longer will slow your target by 50%. It still does the same thing, 20-second cooldown, generates 20 rage baseline, and it will still root the enemy for 1 second, but just no longer slows them. Hamstring is unchanged, still costs 10 rage, and it reduces the target's movement speed by 50% for 15 seconds. Now Colossus Smash, its cooldown is going from 20 seconds up to 45 seconds. It will smash the enemy's armor, dealing physical damage, and increases the damage you deal to them by 30% for 10 seconds. Arms Warrior's Mastery is changing, so your mastery no longer directly affects Colossus Smash. So it's now a base of 30% increased damage you deal to the target. Slam is unchanged, costs 20 rage, slams an opponent, causing physical damage. Overpower is becoming baseline. It will now have a 12-second cooldown, so your other abilities don't just activate it. Its second effect is changed. I'll just read its first effect. It overpowers the enemy, dealing physical damage, cannot be blocked, dodged, or parried. That's the same as on live, but the second effect increases the damage of your next mortal strike by 20%, stacking up to 2 times. So there is that. It no longer has like a 60% chance to crit or whatever it is on live. Mortal Strike, the only change to it is that its base rage is going from 20 rage up to 30 rage, and it still reduces the healing effectiveness on the target. Execute is also getting changed, sort of, technically, not really. Attempts to finish off a foe, causing up to some physical damage based on rage spent. Only usable on enemies that have less than 20% health. If your foe survives, 30% of the rage spent is refunded. So as you see there, all of that is the same. Now the minimum rage to use Execute as an Arms Warrior has been increased. So it uses up to 20 to 40 of your rage. If you have 40 rage, it'll use 40 rage and it'll do more damage versus it using up 20 rage. Which that is pretty much the same as on live, except on live the minimum is you can use it at 10 rage, but it can use up to an extra 30 rage, meaning it can still use up to 40 rage total. So in the grand scheme of things, the only change to Execute is that its minimum rage requirement is increased from 10 rage to 20 rage. And then Victory Rush, the only thing to Victory Rush is that it's getting slightly nerfed. It will now heal you for 20% of your max health instead of 30%, and it's still only usable within 20 seconds after you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor. Pummel is not getting changed, still a 15-second cooldown, it interrupts the target. Battle Shout is returning for warriors across the board, which is awesome. 15-second cooldown increases the attack power of all raid and party members within 100 yards by 10% for 1 hour. So there are some classes getting their raid utilities back, and warriors are one of them. They are getting Battle Shout back. Now let's take a look at the passive abilities. This is your new mastery. Deep Wounds. Deep Wounds damage is increased by a certain percentage, dealing some bleed damage over 3 seconds. Striking an enemy with Mortal Strike, Execute, or Blade Storm inflicts Deep Wounds, so it doesn't have to do with Colossus Smash anymore. Seasoned Soldier is returning. I believe that they took this out in 7.2 for whatever reason, but I believe its effect is changed. Your auto attack crit strikes generate 30% more rage. So Seasoned Soldier is back. And then Tactician is getting changed slightly, so you have a 0.9% chance per rage spent on damaging abilities, and live that's 0.75% to reset the remaining cooldown on Overpower. So since Overpower is baseline, this will only affect Overpower. It won't affect Colossus Smash and Mortal Strike, which I believe are the only two things it affects on live. Now for the talents, and I'll also be going over PvP talents just in case you care about those, since those were added into the beta. And pretty much every tier does have something new. I think there's just one tier which is completely unchanged, but let's get started. War Machine is now going to become arms as well, because it was only Fury before. And what it does is your auto attacks generate 10% more rage, killing an enemy instantly generates 10 rage and increases your movement speed by 30% for 8 seconds. Sudden Death is returning, because I believe it was removed with Legion, and it pretty much does the same thing. The only difference is it now is applied to all abilities. So your damaging melee abilities have a chance to make your next execute cost no rage, be usable on any target regardless of their health, and deal damage as if you spent 40 rage. So before that only had like a 10% chance to activate on your auto attacks, but not any of your melee abilities. And then Skull Splitter is new. Its cooldown is based off your haste, around 18-ish seconds. Its instant bashes an enemy skull, dealing physical damage, and it generates 30 rage. This next tier, Double Time, is unchanged. It still increases the number of charges by 1 and reduces its cooldown by 3 seconds. Impending Victory is coming back to arms, because before I believe it was only for protection. It costs 10 rage, replaces Victory Rush, 30-second cooldown, instantly attacks the target, causing damage and healing you for 15% of your max health. Killing an enemy that yields experience or honor resets the cooldown of Impending Victory. So comparing it to Victory Rush, you can use this whenever. It just has a cooldown now, and it does heal you for 5% less than what Victory Rush heals you for. And then Stormbolt is unchanged. 30-second cooldown, you use it on an enemy, it does physical damage and stuns them for 4 seconds. Because as you see, they got rid of Shockwave, they actually got rid of all AoE stuns in the game. There's no more AoE stuns. This next tier only has one thing changed to it. Trauma is unchanged. It's a passive. Slam, Whirlwind, and Execute now cause the target to bleed for 20% additional damage over 6 seconds. Multiple uses accumulate increased damage. Rend is unchanged. 30 rage. Wounds the target, causing physical damage instantly and then additional physical bleed damage over 12 seconds. And then the only change to Avatar is it will now also generate 20 rage on top of its already existing effect. Transforms into a Colossus for 20 seconds, causing you to deal 20% increased damage and removing all roots and snares, and a 1.5 minute cooldown. Now this next tier is the only tier that is completely unchanged. Second Wind is still the same, restores 6% health every 1 second when you have not taken damage for 5 seconds. Bounding Stride is unchanged, reduces the cooldown on Heroic Leap by 15 seconds, and Heroic Leap now also increases your run speed by 70% for 3 seconds. And then Defensive Stance, as I mentioned, is also unchanged. You take 20% less damage, but you deal 10% less damage, and that lasts until you cancel it. Now, in contrast to the last tier, this next tier is pretty much completely changed. Collateral damage is new. When your abilities damage a second target due to sweeping strikes, they refund 20% of their rage cost, because as I mentioned, sweeping strikes is being baseline now. Now, Warbreaker is coming back in the form of a talent. So before, this is what the Arms Warrior artifact ability granted you. Warbreaker, it kind of does the same thing, but it was just changed slightly. Replaces Colossus Smash, 45-second cooldown, smash to the ground, and shatters enemies around the target within 8 yards, dealing physical damage, and increases the damage you deal to them by 30% for 10 seconds. And now Cleave is becoming a talent. It will now cost 20 rage, up from 10 rage. Its cooldown is still based off of your haste, and its effect was just changed a bit. Strikes all enemies in front of you with a sweeping attack for 740 physical damage. Now hitting 3 or more enemies inflicts deep wounds. Now I already mentioned before what deep wounds does, so just hitting 3 or more enemies will inflict deep wounds, so it no longer increases Whirlwind's damage. Now the second to last tier, End for the Kill, has been changed. It's still passive. Colossus Smash increases your haste by 10% or by 20% if the target is below 20% health, lasts 6 seconds. So that's interesting. Fervor of Battle was moved down a tier and it has been changed. Passive. Whirlwind deals 10% increased damage and slams your primary target. And then Deadly Calm has been changed because Battle Cry is not a thing anymore. So Deadly Calm, still a 1 minute cooldown, reduces the rage cost of all your abilities by 100% for 6 seconds. so that's nice. And then for this last tier, anger management has just slightly been changed. Every 20 rage you spend reduces the remaining cooldown on Colossus Smash, Blade Storm, and Deadly Calm by 1 second. So Colossus Smash is newly added to anger management, and then Deadly Calm is also newly added. So just in case you pick Deadly Calm, since it used to be a passive, now it's a 1 minute cooldown ability. And then Dreadnought is new, passive. Overpower, since Overpower is baseline, has 2 charges and it increases the damage of your next mortal strike by an additional 10%. And then Ravager is unchanged. Still replaces Blade Storm, 1 minute cooldown, throws down a whirling weapon, inflicts damage within 8 yards, 6.1 seconds, generates 7 rage each enemy that it hits. And then for the PvP talents, if you did not watch my video going over how PvP talents will work in Battle for Azeroth, this is how it goes. You have 4 bubbles here. This first bubble is the same for all classes and all specs. You can pick between Adaptation, Relentless, or Gladiator's Medallion, which are all in the first tier of Honor talents on live. You can pick between one of these. They do the exact same thing. The next 3 bubbles are a giant pool of your already existing Honor talents. So all of these names should look familiar because they're all on live. And you can pick any of these 3. So 3 that are on the same tier on live, you can now pick all of them in Battle for Azeroth if you want. Now as far as all of these abilities go, none of them have actually been changed at all. So I'll just be reading the name. If you want to know what they do, you can pause the video to read it or look at your Arms Warrior. But there's Death Row, Master and Commander. Now the thing is about this is it says that the cooldown of Commanding Shout has been reduced by 2 minutes. Commanding Shout is not a thing. It's now Rallying Cry. In fact, I'm actually curious if I pick this, will it reduce the cooldown of Rallying Cry? No, it does not. It doesn't reduce the cooldown of Rallying Cry. Then there's Shadow of the Colossus, Storm of Destruction, War Banner, Sharpened Blade, Duel, Spell Reflection, Death Sentence, Disarm. And there you have it. Those are all of the PvP talents as well as all of the normal talents. And there you have it. Those are all the current changes to Arms Warriors and Battle for Azeroth. Now it is the beta, so things are definitely subject to change before the final release of the expansion, which is August 14th. But I'm curious as to what you guys think. Do you like these changes or do you hate them? You can leave in the comments below, but if you guys like this video, then you can leave a like on it, sub to the channel for videos like this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.